The open space has not been transferred yet from the original to the homeowners association, so title-wise, it's still entirely Tom Doobie's Watertown Village property. So I think both title-wise and regulation-wise, we do meet the criteria to be able to adjust that lot line. If there's concern over development or what's going on out back, I think maybe an appropriate condition or even note on the plan is no development shall occur on the land being exchanged, so that it covers both the letter of the law, the statute, and the common sense that obviously we don't want to allow people to go start developing open space. The credit for that area has already been used in the development. I would also point out, looking at the subdivision plan, the original subdivision plan I didn't do, but I went back through the plan set and what this board approved, and it sure looks like they had 100 acres to spare, or maybe more, in their density calculations that probably could have been used initially, but they decided not to. They decided to put excess land into open space. So I think it makes good common sense that this guy should own his backyard. The open space in this area would widen, so there's a bigger corridor of open space coming out and then across the street into a larger parcel of another open space parcel. So on the ground, it makes sense, and I think it meets the regulation by the letter. I'd be happy to answer any questions or talk about those thoughts.
Any questions from the board?
So I'm curious about the nature of the two parcels that are suggested to be exchanged. Are they treed? Are they?
The Tarnowski lot, this lot here is cleared out and around.
No, I mean the two pieces, the two triangles,
Here?
or one trapezoid, one triangle.
Before the development, there were selective cutting and there were some areas cleared, but the majority of this is wooded and wooded, so it's equal in character. It's both wooded.
What is the intent to do with the new exchanged piece of property? It seems as if it's there because, or the exchange occurs because something wants to be done to it. And if it is going to be, if it is a conservation area, it should not be changed in its content. And so in some ways, if it's a conservation area, why do you bother even worrying about it?
What can happen in that conservation area, and the homeowners would like to do, is a trail coming down and across there, which is why I've actually shown the future trail being out and away, not on that area, rather than having the trail come down across this guy's backyard, which he would prefer not to have. It just leaves him control of his view out his back door.
Why could the homeowners association put a trail across his property without his permission?
Right now, he doesn't own that.
He doesn't.
Okay, so it would not be on his current property.
Right, but right now they could run the trail right across his, right across the tree line in his backyard.
Well, under the state definition, what you're doing is a subdivision. And not only is there the zoning ordinance and the state statutes governing open space and conserved land, but there also there's the declaration, and I think there's an amended declaration that assigns 1/67th interest to the homeowners in the development. And I think the best case is we just simply don't have enough information on what the conditions of approval were, what the declaration says, and we would, assuming we could get that far, that's information we would need to have.
They did have an association meeting. I know Tom was there. He could probably speak to that as far as, because what you're talking about, the declaration, they did have to agree to make any changes on this. Even though the fee title of the land has not transferred, obviously you want these people to be involved in the decision-making process. So If you'd like to just,
Well, let's wait till we open the public comment section.
okay.
Would it be possible for the landowner of that lot to come to an agreement with the homeowners association to have them position the trail where you show it on your map there without having the land transfer?
Anything is possible. Obviously, this gentleman wants to,
I understand that.
I can understand what his thought process is. If he's bought this, he wants to maintain his view. He's got the ability to do that.
Was this future trail put on this plan that you developed?
Yes, I did. I added
So
that.
you added it?
Yes. And it was basically because of that meeting that the association had that we added that,
Showing your
just so
intent.
everybody was clear what the expectations were.
What you're literally asking us to do is change how the conservation land was allotted. Therefore, this is something which was set up as a conservation property. And now you're saying that we can change that to another property. If we end up doing that for all conservation properties, saying, oh, well, we could just exchange this or exchange that, I think that we get into real trouble dealing with, yours is very small, probably in some ways realistic, but if we end up allowing yours, how big an exchange do we do when the land was designated as a conservation area?
And I understand the dilemma, but certainly the planning board in this case, and I've got to compliment the board in that they actually have a planner working on actual planning. I have a few other towns that I'm struggling with right now that don't have any guidance whatsoever, and it's difficult to get them in any one direction. It can change from night to night. But in good planning and good common sense, I think this makes sense. You have the ability to take good planning and good common sense with your regulations and apply that to each individual
But you're
situation.
telling us that we need to change some conservation easement, which is there, and extent, and say that that's no longer valid in exchange for something else. And isn't that a slippery slope for us to deal with?
I'm not seeing that in this situation, but
Okay, but we have to look at other situations that could come up in the same development. Is this considered a conservation easement?
no, it was left as open space. There's no conservation easement on it.
Tavis?
If the board is interested, I did reach out to your council on this. And basically speaking, the regulations require conservation land. So the mechanism, even though it's called open space, it is effectively conservation land in this subdivision.
Okay, so it's under the jurisdiction of the state.
No,
No, it's just conservation land that can't change.
Okay, yeah, right. So if you want to change it, just a minute, you have to go through a process.
Yes.
Okay, yeah,
The,
right.
just for clarity and for people listening at home, a conservation easement is typically dedicated to a third party to oversee and monitor. There's no third party maintaining, monitoring, or there's no rights been deeded out from this property, which is why I say there's not a conservation easement on it. You read the statute, which...
You're correct. It's not an easement. It's conservation land under the premise under which this was granted.
Right, and which is exactly what Tavis pointed out in his letter with the RSA talking about.
And it is
Protection.
essentially the planning board who is the group who ends up looking at making sure that the quote easement or the conservation land is kept intact. So it is not an easement with somebody holding that.
Correct.
It is the planning board who looks at what is happening and how the changes are going to be affecting
Yep,
what happens here and also what happens in the future.
agreed, yes.
I think there may be other methods to get that path, if that's the threat, off of the view from his house. Maybe he could offer to build it or something, and put it somewhere agreeable, and then leave things alone so that we don't get into this quagmire.
Why don't we open the public comments?
Oh, sure.
Unless anybody has any objection? All right, so let's open the public comment section of this meeting, if you'd like to speak.
I am Tom Doobie. Thank you for letting me speak. I built this gentleman a house, and the house got a little further back than it should have gotten on the lot. So the gentleman was very nice about it, and nothing against me or the association or anything. He said, is there any way I could make my backyard a little bit bigger so no one, because I told him there'd be potentially a trail through the open space behind his house. So that's when he asked, is there any way we can do a lot line adjustment to make sure that the trail stays in the woods and there's a little bit of buffer between his yard and the trail. I mean, it is that simple, and you know, I'm a firm believer of, doing something right. And I understand, your concept of, not being able to defend it against somebody come in that might have a conservation easement or another open space piece of land. But the open space is still staying contiguous. That land that touches this land is still there, contiguous, right in the same exact spot. Maybe, 50 or 100 feet to the left, just extending it out a little bit on the right, and on the left side, it comes right back. And I fully understand where you guys are coming from, but I do think every situation, the way we look at it, our planning board, I'm a chairman of the planning board in Wakefield, is that every situation's different. Every applicant is different. Every piece of land is different. This, we're swapping the exact type of land for the exact type of land, half treed, half open on both pieces, and it just makes so much sense, and it's really common. I'm on the board of directors. I still do own the open space and plan on deeding it as soon as we're able to get the project finished. We have 2 lots left to develop. We're developing 3 of them right now that we're finishing, and we got 2 left. And, I know you guys had mentioned 167th. Everybody in the first phase of that development was they own 132nd, and phase 2, which this guy is in, owned 167th of the open space, all that. But just so you know, we're in a process right now, and we've got 95% of the people that voted in the association to make everybody equal. So every lot has 1 vote, every lot has the same, same payment for the open space. So it's a really great working community together now. Phase 1 and phase 2, it's totally complete. And the board and everybody, we put this out to everybody, and the board voted unanimously to approve this to be able to go forward to you guys. So I know, you mentioned that maybe there's a better way to do it, but I don't think the association can grant an easement or anything to these people in the open space. And there's limited common open space there, which is, this is the limited common open space, and then there's some open space there that we can put ball fields on for recreation. And then there's conservation open space, which is all the wetlands all the way along North Wakefield Road and all the way around the back, the lower side towards Amanda Bevards. So there's this piece of land is really right in the middle of development, and it's still contiguous for animals to be able to go through the open space. It opens up, it doesn't open it up, but it doesn't change the fact that people from the backyards can go down to this open space and walk right out across the road down to the larger places of open space. So I would really recommend that you guys take a good look at it and hopefully vote in favor of this.
Thank you.
And if you have any questions for me, I've been living it and breathing it since 2016 when I bought it, and trying to get harmony throughout that whole project's been quite a process. And we just had our annual meeting the other day, and everybody is pretty excited to have a complete project finally. I think it started back 20 years ago, so thank you.
This is not really a comment on the merits of your proposal, but I simply think we don't have the legal authority to do what you're requesting.
I appreciate your comment. I just disagree, that's all. But I hear what you're saying.
Is there any other discussion amongst the board?
I would suggest that, the left, the right borderline goes back 55 feet, 20 yards, or less than 20 yards. I can't imagine how your organization, in the same way that Vaughn suggested, couldn't just reroute the trail. And perhaps if you ended up being the one who cut the trail in that area, they would accept that, and that's the way it would move. And so it doesn't seem like it's something that we should move the earth for, and then therefore put us at risk for other changes in conservation easements. I think, as Roger says, I don't think we have the authority to do it.
Any other comments? Would I'm sorry.
Just one last thing. I know that the gentleman and wife are a little bit skittish about people being in their backyard. And I think everybody's different, It wouldn't bother me one iota that the trail was right on the property line in my backyard. So I think everybody's different. These people are they're worrywatts. There used to be an old skidder trail through there, and they asked me if I could put big boulders, blocking off the skidder trail from the lot on the right and blocking off the skidder trail from the road on the left. They're just skittish of people. I don't know I know where they came from, but I don't know their background, who they are or what they are, but they are just really worried about people being in their backyard.
But weren't they aware of where the property was when they purchased it? And
Absolutely. They bought the house already built, basically. So they were aware when they bought it, absolutely.
Do remember that any change that we would make goes in perpetuity, and therefore, if the people who buy this 10 years from now, 20 years from now are not as skittish, it is not an issue.
I have a question.
But that also works the other way, that, okay, today the trail isn't there, but then the association changes and they want to do a different trail, they would change something around. That's what this gentleman's afraid of.
Julie?
I have a question looking at the other side that, say, if this was something that could happen, what is the mechanism that has to happen to make the subdivision be broken and then to be reformed? Is that like going to the ZBA, or is that a higher court, or is that a thing that can even happen now that this has been filed?
So my answer to that goes to 175, 151, standard for review, paragraph E, conservation land number 2. All conservation land shall be permanently restricted from future subdivision and development. So a boundary line adjustment by definition is a re-subdivision of the underlying land interest. I would add to that, there's nothing preventing the current owners of both the conservation land or the private property from agreeing on an easement in same said 0.2 acres that says no trail should be developed in this area, that could be recorded in perpetuity.
And that would fix the problem, right?
yes, it would.
It's one mechanism. I'm not to come up with solutions, but that is something that might help. Other things that have come up is that the conservation land hasn't been given over to the association yet. Well, it has by act of this board back when it reapproved the subdivision. So for those that aren't aware, Colden Farms came in as a subdivision. Phase 2 was redacted, if you will, by the planning board for inaction over a period of time. It then came back in and was reapproved, and there were a number of lots. And as Kevin has mentioned, yes, this project originally required, I believe, 157 acres of open space. I believe there's 256 and change in open space, both open space and conservation land. But once the planning board says, yes, this is the plan, that then becomes the plan. And by the regulation, you can't authorize future subdivision. Now, somebody perhaps could appeal that to the zoning board, but I don't believe the zoning board even has the ability to undo that.
Not if it's under 674-21A.
But
Correct. So
21.
you're basically in a superior court case type thing.
this court, this board did that exact same thing, though, because that's how Phase 2 came about. It had been platted.
And then was revoked.
Okay, but there were lots built. There was open space platted and recorded in the registry. And this board undid that and re-subdivided with new areas of open space, new lots.
Slight difference. It was revoked for failure to vest Phase 2. It was then
Okay,
re-subdivided.
but it was a recorded subdivision plan with open space.
Yes, that
And then
disappeared.
and those lines changed. It didn't disappear because there were already lots sold.
There are multiple files from Superior Court that I think argue that a bit differently.
I don't want to go there, but I'm just pointing out that it is possible. This does happen. And
Well, you could
think it is-
re-subdivide the whole subdivision.
Sure.
And then there wouldn't be a problem
Or
with
even-
this, but it would be
or
a
even
problem
just a phase.
with everything else.
I have to admit, when this first came to me at face value, I went 0.12 in, 0.12 out, great, have a nice day. Which then begged the question. I then looked at it and said, well, it was called open space, it wasn't called conservation land. So the question went to Planning Board Council, and the first statement on the response was, they cannot do this, i.e. they being you. So I don't think you have the authority to do it. You, of course, do not have to follow the guidance of council. Personally, I don't know what this harms, but I don't get to speak personally for the planning board.
Okay, well, the thing I'm concerned about, if we were to do this, what would, what about the other property? Oh, this is a good idea, I want to swap this and that. I mean,
Sure,
I don't think
any
it's a
one of
good
the 60,
precedent.
any one of the 62 lots in there could look at re-subdividing and getting down so that only 157 acres of open space were required. But that's not what the board approved. I get the point, but yes. So I honestly think the applicant or the property owner, not necessarily the applicant, but the applicant and the owner have the ability to resolve the solution without the planning board taking action that would open the planning board up to legal action. Even though everyone has signed to agree, doesn't mean everyone continues to agree.
Any more comments from the board or discussion?
I think we should follow advice of the council.
Would you care to make a motion?
I'll make a motion that we deny this based on legal advice from our attorney.
Don't we have to
cannot
accept
act
the
on it,
application
that
as
we don't have the
complete?
authority.
Not really on the boundary line adjustment, but
Okay.
it doesn't hurt. It would not hurt to accept the application as complete, then open the public hearing, then close the public hearing, then have a motion, et cetera.
I missed that step, I
Nope, you're
apologize.
okay.
So let's accept the applications. I make a motion to accept the application as
Second.
complete. Kathy seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes. And should I reopen the public hearing?
No.
No.
No, I would just close it.
Yeah, so let's close the public hearing. And then, Steve, would you like to make your motion?
Yes, I make a motion that we deny this based on advice from our council that we cannot act, we don't have the authority to act on it.
I'll second that.
Kathy seconds. Any further discussion?
I think it sets a really bad precedent for future conservation subdivisions, which we're going to continue to work on. I think we should leave it
Slippery
as
slope.
is, as the attorney advises us.
All right, if there's no further discussions, have a vote. All in favor?
Of the motion to deny?
Yes.
All in favor of the motion to deny?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None? There we go.
Thank you for your time.
Sorry, guys.
Thank you. Don't mind me if I look over your shoulder. I walked off with anything. Paying attention to my 7-month-old great-grandchild getting in the way.
Don't blame me. All right, the next item on the agenda is the resumption of the conservation subdivision discussion. Tavis has included the latest red line version in your packets, which I believe incorporated all the changes from our most recent discussion.
If you guys, I saw on the notes that you were actually working on this tonight. If you want something with a good sample, that phase of Calden Farm has, I think, all 3 different versions and the density spelled out on it. It would be a good sample to say, what happens if we do it by HIS, what happens if we do it by, so. Thank you. Good example.
So just to extend off that, one of the important things to remember is that with some of the changes the board made, the numbering system of the ordinance changes. So for example, with the removal of 175, 148 exemptions, the numbers change. So the new 175, 148, let me just make sure I'm in the right place here. The new 148 is zoning districts in which permitted. So I wanted to be sure that 175, 148, now the conservation subdivision option shall be permitted in the following districts. The following lot size table is a suggested guide. That is my,
Yeah, I have suggested a rewording for that.
oh, that's fine.
Instead of saying the parcel size triggering required open space, since this is optional, I would suggest saying the minimal parcel size for conservation subdivision.
So minimum lot size on the left.
Is the
And then-
minimum lot, so it's 51, you were saying you need 10 acres, so we should,
So on the left is minimum lot size 1, 2, 3, and 5 to 10. The right-hand column would be labeled what?
the minimum parcel size for conservation subdivision, or you could say for allowing conservation subdivision, or just minimum parcel size for conservation subdivision, which is, I think, what we agreed to.
Minimum parcel size for conservation subdivision.
Because it isn't a triggering thing and it's not required.
Correct. No, I get what you're saying. I just want to get the words right.
If for some reason renumbering is a problem, we could put under the exemptions any parcel under 10 acres.
I
And
think
leave all the numbering alone.
I think we've got the renumbering as far as I could tell.
Well, no, I'm just saying, if it's easier not to redo it, you start out with saying, obviously, if you have less than 10 acres, go away, and then get into the table. Just a thought.
I'm just following guidance. I mean, I understand Vaughn's point, but by the same token, there are different rules if you have a 1 acre minimum lot size versus a 10 acre minimum lot size.
And the numbering has been changed throughout, I think.
Right.
So you'd have to
Yes.
change it back.
All right, so never mind then.
I don't have to change, no, nothing has to change back.
Right.
I made it, and just going through this real quickly, 175, 150, made sure all the tracks turned to parcels, made the change to the appropriate natural resource inventory maps. The reason there's an extra, almost whole blank page in there has to do with the table itself, which is the minimum lot size table. That's why that's blank. Under D, assure became ensure.
Yeah, I think on C, there was, and I think Julie picked this up, there was one tract that didn't get changed to parcel. Third line N and C.
Yeah, you said you just did it.
No, I didn't. I'll get it.
You didn't do it.
It was in, no.
I got it. All set.
And there's an extra configuration that ended up on the next page.
Next page.
After that blank page, at the top of the next page.
That has to do with the table. Yes. I tried deleting that for about 3 hours. That's why
Okay.
that's doing that. That's a formatting thing I cannot figure out in Word, is where that configuration comes from.
I'll get you a bottle of whiteout.
Whiteout.
And then
If it's approved, it will go, I just hit delete on it to make sure they remove it.
and I thought at the last meeting, we agreed that it was going to be called conservation land, and that was changed sometimes, but not every time, since that term is defined in the ordinance.
Well, we decided to call it conserved land so that it doesn't get confused with conservation land.
Well, there's I thought we
Okay,
agreed
so
to call it conservation land because what we're proposing meets the definition of conservation land in the ordinance. Conservation open space is more restrictive, but when we looked at conservation land, I thought we agreed that that was what we were proposing.
Well, I thought we were going to come up with a new word, conserved
It's
land,
conserved, I remember, because it's a weird
Yeah.
word, conserved.
so that
No,
it wouldn't
so
be confused
let-
with other
let-
things.
But
Let's
then
just-
you're dealing with a term that's not defined in the ordinance, and I think if you look at conservation land, it says exactly, it's not locking it up tight. I think it says exactly.
Conservation land is currently defined as that portion of a tract that is set aside for protection of sensitive natural features, farmland, scenic views, and other unique features. Conservation land may be accessible to the residents of the development and/or the town, or it may contain areas of conservancy lots that are not accessible to the public. Versus conservation open space that is defined as environmentally sensitive areas that are to remain permanently in their natural state. Any alteration of land or drainage, including removal of including the removal or planting of vegetation, shall be solely for the benefit of wildlife habitat and natural resource protection. So my recollection was to go to conservation land. And I believe
It's changed sometimes, but
in
no.
K it says conserved land, so that needs to say conservation land.
Okay, under what?
Under 151C, it needs to be changed.
Well, I'm going to do a find and replace for conserved for conservation land, but, so under 175, 151B, it refers to all conservation land conserved. Yes, restrictions has a typo, that's fixed now. But then under C, it says for those areas not designated as conserved land. So I think that for consistency, it needs to say conservation land.
Yeah.
So, yes, the intent was to get to conservation land throughout, because that was the board's direction.
There's one place where conserved land is correct, and that's under F, minimum lot size.
Correct.
Why wouldn't it be conservation land, if that's the way we're headed?
Because this is more, it's not referring to land conserved under this ordinance necessarily. It's just any kind of concern
Yeah, under
lands.
minimum lot size says the minimum lot area for residential dwelling sites shall be flexible to allow for consideration of dwelling sites in types, comma, landscape and topography, comma, adjacent open space or conserved land, comma, and access.
Okay, so in our conservation subdivision, we're considering agricultural land, for instance. It doesn't fit under conservation land in the don't touch it, don't take care of it, which is why I thought we were headed into a new area here to define ourselves what you could do in the conserved land. And we have a list of things you can and can't do for discussion, like I see somewhere else. Management, agricultural cultivation, trails, snowmobile trails. So I just want to make sure that we're not confusing two different things. And that's why I thought we were going toward conserved land.
Under conservation, again, by definition, currently, that portion of a tract that is set aside for protection of sensitive natural features, comma, farmland, comma, scenic views, comma, and other unique features.
So what about snowmobile trails, trails for passive use, forest management? I mean, we're defining it in the next section.
Conservation land may be accessible to the residents of the development, and so I don't see an inconsistency there, personally.
An inconsistency.
Correct.
What if in the future, though, we decide that there's something else that's allowed in conserved land, such as a playing field or, you know, any other thing that might be considered for the common good?
But the subdivision would already have been approved and would be subject to the current restrictions. So if you were going to make it open to something more, then that would require changing the name.
Which I thought we decided to do, and then define it ourselves what you can and cannot do, and not lump it into a whole group that's already elsewhere in the ordinance.
It's not elsewhere in the ordinance.
Conservation land, we have two definitions, you just read them.
They're two different definitions, but they're two different things. They're not two definitions of the same thing.
Conservation land and conservation open space are different things.
And what's the difference between them?
Conservation land is that portion of a tract that is set aside for the protection of sensitive natural features, comma, farmland, comma, scenic views, comma, and any unique features. Conservation land may be accessible to the residents of the development and/or the town, or it may contain areas of conservancy lots that are not accessible to the public. Conservation open space are environmentally sensitive areas that are to remain permanently in their natural state. Any alteration of the land or drainage, comma, including the removal or planting of vegetation, comma, shall be solely for the benefit of wildlife habitat and natural resource protection.
So in the case that you have 50% of land dedicated to, I'll call it conserved land, you may have some non-environmentally sensitive lands and not, you know, delicate habitats and other things. So I think it's a separate thing. It may be, you know, a common area in the middle that is sort of a town center. Maybe it's an open field. Maybe it's a, you know, pathways through. I've done it before where interesting rock outcroppings, which are not sensitive, but maybe an interesting group of structures, let's say natural structures, to gather around. It's not sensitive. It's not wet. It's, you know, it's just some special land that's set aside for the common area.
You know, you've got farmland, you've got scenic views, you've got other unique features on the definition.
But I don't think either of those two definitions covered land that is just left open. Conserved open space. It sounds like they're all sensitive.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I'm just concerned that
I think the point where I heard the board going was that if you have 100 acres, 50 acres need to go into conservation land. You then have the ability on the remainder with the formula. I thought more of the discussion was going to be on the formula, quite honestly.
we haven't gotten there yet.
But once you then decide, okay, this is the 50% that we can build in, and we're going to come up with a density on that, there might be areas in that that are restricted from development, but they are separate from the conservation land.
So we have two types of set-aside land?
No, we have one 50% requirement for the subdivision. If
Yeah.
somebody wants to set aside additional land, that might be where they come up with their 10% additional for a density bonus. Not only are we going to do the 50% set aside, but we're going to set aside this section of cool natural stuff
Yeah.
in the middle.
Right.
And that's what they use to get their density bonus, but that's separate from the conservation land.
But if the
As-
cool
as-
natural stuff is part of the 50%, but it's not sensitive, it's not wet, it's not, it's something intentionally set aside, let's say in the middle of a neighborhood or somewhere people can walk to, it shouldn't be treated like an conservation land under the definitions that you just read.
I'm just trying to repeat what I heard.
No, you're just reading.
What I heard what the board say at the
Yeah.
last meeting.
This
Yeah.
is a discussion. I'm just saying there might be other kinds of land in that open space that you're designating that aren't conservation as under the old definition.
An example might be a ball field.
No, but you are not permitting a ball field.
In the conservation land, but there could be area that's set aside
Set-
from development that is not conservation land that is
Correct.
used for other things, and I think
Right.
that's where Vaughn's going.
But what we're talking about is a definition, not a restriction. This is not imposing any restriction. If we're gonna call it a conservation something, it needs to be defined somewhere so somebody knows what you're talking about.
Exactly.
And what we're proposing, it seems to me, fits the definition of conservation land. It's not the more restrictive definition.
So I read those as more restrictive.
But it's not imposing a restriction, it's proposing a definition.
With restrictions. That's part of what the language that was just read.
Well, I think it's just restricting how you can label it. That's the purpose of the definition.
Okay, so on a plan that comes to us, we have open space.
No.
We
don't have open space.
have conservation open space.
No, you
Conservation,
don't want conservation open space because that's more stringent than conservation land. So let's call it conservation something for this discussion.
okay. So let's say you have conservation land. Let's say it's the 50% required. And now some of it is places where you'll have pathways and people inhabiting it, let's say.
People aren't going to be inhabiting it, though.
Why couldn't they?
What do you mean by inhabiting?
Well, like meeting together or going into the common area to,
Not having a house in.
no houses.
Okay,
No
because
houses.
I'm
Yeah.
guessing that the word inhabit is.
Yeah, no, I don't mean structures. I just mean enjoying.
People will be using it, not inhabiting it,
gathering,
but
yeah.
using that space.
It's a more useful open space
Well,
than
it's-
conservation land, in my opinion.
But
I mean, could you
you're
put
looking
in-
at this definition, and conservation land may be accessible to the residents of the development, or the town they can make it accessible to the town, but they don't have to. It's accessible.
So 50% of the original parcel has to go into conserved land. That has those parameters, and you can do those things that this outlines. You might have 90% protected, if you will.
So we're still calling it 50% conserved land.
What this draft says is 50% of the parent parcel is conserved. How you use the other 50% is up to the development and the board.
But conserved as opposed to conservation. I'm just concerned about
Well,
the
it's
language.
No, 50% is conservation land is the way this is drafted.
So we need to get rid of all this conserved that
It's done, yes.
you are, well,
Well,
That's
at
assuming
at the
you,
last meeting, the board sort of went back and vassled, if you will, between conserved and conservation, but the discussion was about picking the conservation land definition.
Okay, so if you've got that word now, 50% is conservation land, and only 20% has been built upon, what is the rest of this out here that we can like put picnic benches and stuff in? What do we call it? Is that open space?
I'm not sure we have to call it anything.
it's, yeah.
Correct. By the way it's worded, by the way this is worded, it doesn't have to be called anything. Because remember, we still don't know if this is single-family homes on individual lots, or if this is two multifamily structures with height variances and other things. You know, all we're trying to do is say, start with the base, or all what I'm hearing you say, not, start with the base parcel. 50% of it is conserved, and you can do the 4 or 5 things that are listed. You can do anything else the zone lets you do over here. If you want to restrict this for ball fields and leach fields and wellheads and whatever, that's fine.
So, but does it have a name? We have a lot. Half of it's conserved as conservation land.
You've got the buildable half.
What is the other
yes.
half called? Does it need to be called by something, or is it just the other half of the lot?
Right now, it's lined up that the only criterion is that half of it be conserved land.
So, but I think, Julie, to
I
your
like to
point, though,
name
is
things.
you're asking about the other half.
Yeah,
and
does it have a name?
I don't think it needs a name.
Well, oftentimes in developments, it has been called limited common area, so that it may still be owned by the association, but it's not part of the 50% necessary to be conserved.
But that would be, if it was condominiumized, would be limited common area generally.
Correct.
Yeah. I mean, we don't know what form of ownership this will take.
And I don't think it makes a difference for the purpose of what we're doing here now.
So it could show up on a plan as just subdivision land?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
it depends.
no,
Usable
because
land.
the board is not going to approve a plan that just says this half nothing, this half whatever.
Yeah,
You're going to know what that's going to look like. It's going to have to be on the plan that comes in. So whoever develops said plan is going to call it
gonna
limited
name it
common
something.
area or owner's open space or,
okay, they're going to name it, okay.
yes. You are not just going to say, build? No.
No, they're going to
That's what
certainly
it
show,
sounded
they'll show what they intend to do with the land, but I don't think it's important for us to have a label for it now. Certainly, it'll be defined properly on any plan that we would approve.
Okay,
And it would be, if the lots, they'd be called lots. If it's a condominium, they would be common land, basically.
Or common land, limited common land 1, common land 4, it all depends on how far somebody else wants to go.
Are we settled on this now, or?
I don't know if you're going to get an answer to that question until you start seeing some of these. Because I'm sure there are going to be many iterations and nuances depending on the parcel that comes in. But
As there should.
But the takeaway from this is that what I'm hearing is the intent of the board is to say half of what you start with is conservation land, of which you can do these things. The rest will sort out based on the zone you're in and the density you're permitted. And no, it doesn't have a name in this ordinance right now.
So everything under, what number are we on here? K, conserved land is conservation land. It keeps coming up, conserved land,
Yes.
conserved land, conserved land,
That's
Yes.
conserved land.
I for the sake of moving forward, find and replace just turned all things conserved into conservation land for consistency with the definition. My intent was exactly the same thing, but now there's no question. Let's see where we are here. Got rid of the configuration, we turned assure to ensure.
What page, or where are we on? Just after the blank page?
Yes, just after the mostly blank page, configuration is now deleted, just so no one's confused about that word showing up twice. D, legal document review, somebody has to do all of those things. E, as original disappeared, E became maintenance. It's been a long-held contention that town ownership was removed from this section. 175, 151, conservation subdivisions shall require notice design review meeting with the planning board prior to formal subdivision approval. all conservation land created through the subdivision shall be subject to, which is exactly what you just dealt with in your boundary line adjustment.
Tavis, and that one you just read, you misspelled restrictions.
Spelled what?
Yep.
The word restrictions in 175, 151B.
Oh, yeah, it's already fixed, but okay, yes, thank you. Work through the changes in permitted uses as the board has discussed. Okay, permitted density. My recollection of the discussion last time was that the following formula, i.e. gross parcel
Square footage,
square footage, yes, not, or acreage, I guess.
acreage, whatever. Oh, you got square footage again, so you got to decide
Do square
acreage
footage,
or
no,
one or the other.
it's square footage,
Yeah.
either way. It's all the same. Gross parcel square footage minus square footage of all poorly drained soils minus square footage of all slopes greater than or equal to 25%. I tried to use words, not symbols, just to remove confusion. Minus 5% of the remaining parcel for road rights of way with a superscript, yes. Divided by the underlying zoning district minimum parcel size. So I played around with multiple versions in my head of the superscript. The planning board reserves the authority to modify the percentage of right-of-way. My other thought is the planning board is hereby authorized to waive the percentage of right-of-way. I don't know what the board is more comfortable with or something else.
I thought we came up with some language like 5% or actual.
Yeah,
The actual right-of-way.
I have some suggested language, which we agree on this, to just reword it, not change anything, if you want to hear it.
Yes.
Okay, I would suggest putting a colon after subdivision and saying, so it reads, permitted formulas shall be determined as follows, well, after subdivision.
Where are you after D? Permitted
Yeah,
density?
I would put a colon after subdivision and then state the formula, which would be the minimum lot area of the underlying zoning, the parcel size divided by the minimum lot area of the underlying zoning district minus the square footage of all very poorly drained soils minus the square footage of slopes greater than or equal to 25%.
That,
And
Oh,
then,
I see. He's flipping the formula around. I
yeah,
see where you're going.
it's not the usual method. The usual method is you figure out what the land is that you have left, and you divide that by the density, not you divide it by the density and then subtract. I mean, it's just
well,
weird math.
the state formula was doing it, taking the density, taking the zoning district density and taking the parcel divided by the lot size in the zoning district and then subtracting these.
That, I think that it does what we said first. You just take the parcel, square footage, subtract the things that you don't count, and then figure out from that, but divided by the number of lots you're allowed in the, by size, 4 acre, 2 acre, half an acre, that's your number. That's the way it's written in the state regulations that I read, the state advice, and I didn't bring that stuff that I copied. We can look into that, but I think,
I think you get to the same place. I think it's a difference of how people read formulas like this.
I bet if we do some examples, it'll come up strangely different.
Well, if you
So the
do
current,
it that way,
so what's written in the draft in front of you is modeled after the current definition of net development density, which starts out as total tract square footage minus square footage of very poorly drained soils minus square foot areas of slopes 15 to 20%, minus 20% of the remaining land for conventional road construction and right-of-way divided by the minimum lot size.
And that's from our subdivision or from the state's?
That's from 175 as it's written today. So total area minus very poorly drained minus slopes greater than 15 to 20. No. Total area minus very poorly drained minus slopes greater than 15% minus 20% of the remaining area divided by minimum lot size. So this essentially says the same thing with the footnote of the planning board reserves the right, or reserves the authority to waive or modify the percentage of right-of-way.
So, except for the numbers are different.
Correct.
Yeah.
Because our current subdivision regulations currently allow you to consider slopes up to 25% or over 25% as long as you have additional area. So there's currently an inconsistency between conservation subdivision and the subdivision regulations. So I heard the board happily and supportively agree to removing those in excess of or equal to or greater than 25% for slopes as opposed to going down to 15%.
Right.
So gross parcel square footage minus square footage of very poorly drained minus square footage of slopes greater than or equal to 25%. Minus 5% of the remaining parcel for road rights-of-way divided by underlining zoning district, which I thought we talked about for about 10 minutes at the last meeting.
We did, and that's the formula that we had. But
So
then
my
we-
only question was, and this might be a legal question, I don't know if this can be vetted out tonight, whether the planning board reserves the authority to modify the percentage of right-of-way or to waive the percentage of right-of-way. Because there's likely to be situations where someone comes in with roadway or an access to the built portion of the site that is less than 5%, and I can't imagine the board would want to penalize someone for less right-of-way than is required.
And I thought we came up with a phrase, and this isn't it, about actual. If the actual is less, the planning board has the right to reduce that percentage.
Well, and that's, I generalized it by saying has the authority to modify the percentage.
I've got some proposed language for that.
That's fine.
The planning board may modify the percentage deduction for the right-of-way when the right-of-way is less than 5% as shown on the subdivision plan.
That's kind of wordy.
There's less than 5% of the remaining land.
Would there ever be a time when it would actually go up?
What's that?
Would there actually be a time when it would actually go up more than 5%?
I'm sure there is.
It could be.
So maybe the word modify is a good thing because it could
But-
go either way?
No, because this isn't for determining the amount of right-of-way. This is for determining the number of
Lots.
structures or dwellings that can be built based on a lot size. So as easy as it could be to put in one frontage road, if you will, that has a majority of the lots, but then there's a driveway that serves 3 more, maybe 5% makes sense, because it's not actually a right-of-way, it's just a driveway. Does that make sense?
Kind of. I
I-
just don't want it to get locked in by saying a specific number, when the word modify kind of lets you wiggle a
either
little
way.
bit.
So, I mean, personally, I'm comfortable with the planning board may modify the percentage of right-of-way.
It seems too open. If it's less or something, because you don't want to, I mean, that's, what if we suddenly decided we needed more percentage, we want you to have less lots? It just seems
Well-
open.
My thought, or my suggestion to the board, is you want the ability to get the best design for the land that's in front of you, as opposed to holding someone to an arbitrary number, as you do now, for removing 20% when only 5% might be developed.
Right.
The way conservation subdivision is worded right now, a developer is all but beholden to the net development density where you have to take out 20% even though you might be proposing 2.
Right.
The language you have now gives flexibility to the board.
What about 5%, or unless it's actually less or something like that.
Well, that's what Roger was saying.
Yeah, no, but I mean, I think it should be simply said, without this whole,
It's simpler just to say, or
just to
actually
say
less.
it, or, in the case that it's shown to be less, or however you'd say that, without, this little sub one thing.
So the planning board may modify the percentage of right-of-way where proposed percentage of right-of-way is less than 5%?
Should be as shown
Yeah.
on the plan,
Something like that,
on the subdivision plan.
yeah. I think it needs a little more.
So the planning
specificity.
board may modify the percentage of right-of-way where percentage of right-of-way proposed is less than 5%?
Yeah.
Should-
But the assumption
That
is
doesn't sound right to me.
reduce.
It seems like it should be,
I think
in the instance you're
reduce.
talking about, the planning board has the authority to reduce
Yeah.
the amount of right-of-way. And not tie it to when it's less than 5%. I think that's
Well,
confusing.
And do it as a completely separate sentence.
so the planning board has the authority to reduce the
planning board is
percentage of right-of-way.
authorized. The planning board is authorized.
Planning board is authorized? I'm concerned about the voting public that might say, well, the planning board just has the ability to do whatever they want with that
That's
sentence.
a concern, yeah.
Yeah.
So we have the authority to reduce the percentage of right-of-way when the right-of-way is shown to be less than 5%.
But you have to have some way to show that that reduced right-of-way is sufficient.
Well, we're looking at a plan.
Yeah.
Well, I guess, I mean, here's the animal. If you have a 100-acre parcel and you have 2-acre zoning, right now everyone knows you take out some percentage for right-of-way and you end up with 48 lots. Hypothetically. Probably, okay, let's say 40 lots. You take out a percentage of the 100, you divide everything by 2 acres minus the right-of-way, and you end up with 40 lots. We're already taking, or this is already proposing to take somebody from 40 lots to something less than 50 lots.
I think what we're proposing is that if you have
Because
less right-of-way, you could get another lot, let's say. Let's say you get 4% actual roadway. If you figure out some configuration where your roadway is less, then you might, if it's a 1-acre zone, and you've got 1 acre extra, you'd get 1 extra building. It's an incentive to have
Yeah.
less roads,
Yeah.
which might be good for the town.
So, okay, so think through this a little bit, because right now, the roadway regulations are going through, so the right-of-way is 50 feet wide by whatever length it's going to be. It's going to be I don't, without sitting down and looking at each individual project that comes in, I don't know what the difference is going to be between 4% and 5%.
Depends on how big the tract is. If it's little, it probably won't make a difference.
Exactly. So is the intent to encourage potentially another lot by having less road or road right-of-way?
Why not?
I think having less roadway is beneficial.
Okay, I'm just trying to get,
And I mean, because that's one of your killer costs.
Right.
okay, so the planning board is authorized to reduce percentage of right-of-way when the percentage of right-of-way is proposed,
Of proposed right-of-way.
yeah,
The
percentage of
the percentage deduction for the right-of-way.
proposed right-of-way is less than 5%. Okay. Okay. Does that sound right?
Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
little
I
clumsy,
like
but I
it
think it's
because it's more
okay.
specific, not
Yeah.
we just have the right to modify. That sounds scary.
Yes, I agree.
Okay, so after that, there's just the concept plan, minimum lot size,
What is the wording there?
on what?
on the density calculation. I do agree with the way Vaughn explained it.
So D, permitted density, the following formula shall determine maximum density permitted for a conservation subdivision. That should be a colon, not a period. Gross parcel square footage minus square footage of all very poorly drained soils minus square footage of all slopes greater than or equal to 25%, minus 5% of the remaining parcel for road rights of way, superscript, divided by the underlying zoning district minimum lot size. Superscript reading, the planning board is authorized to reduce percentage of right-of-way when the percentage of proposed right-of-way is less than 5%.
Sounds simple.
Can I just do a picky thing? Where you've got the backslash for the divide thing on the underlying, us lay people that aren't mathematicians, could we put a divide sign in there instead? Because we see backslash all the time when we're using computers for websites and all this other stuff.
So you're looking for
Well,
the
for the-
horizontal bar with the two
Horizontal with the
dots?
thing.
For the mathematically inclined, that's why there's the double parens at the beginning and at the end.
Yeah, and I'm not even questioning that because it's not me.
Instead of gross
I
parcel.
don't know if I can put a division sign
Well,
in.
the alternative is to, instead of using the mathematic symbols, just write out minus, divided by, and so forth.
Yeah.
Well, I've seen it simply put like a table. Lot size, minus this, minus this, minus this,
Yeah.
total divided by minimum lot size.
And I would go with,
Because if it's graphically a formula.
I
we
would go, excuse me, I didn't mean to, I would go with your parcel size instead of, because I think that's clearly understood. I'm not sure, when you talk gross parcel density,
No,
We're not
square
doing
footage.
density.
Square footage.
Density is wrong.
Density became square footage.
but I would put, no, I'm talking about to start with, you start with the parcel size and then do, which is what you had just said.
Yeah.
You do your parcel size, then you do your deductions. And then I agree with you, you divide by the minimum lot area of the underlying zoning district.
I'm suggesting the way it's formatted could be more mathematical looking. You
Well,
put
not so much
this
that, but more
sentence
pictograph.
minus this sentence minus
Or,
this sentence.
or could it be replacing the mathematical signs with the negative, or the subtract is the, just put minus?
Subtract, minus.
yeah,
Minus,
yeah.
minus, and then
And
divided
divided
by
by-
underlying zoning, and that ends
Yeah,
up
that might
being, I think,
Be less confusing
it-
too.
yes,
Yeah.
because the little slash for division is,
Because this is really lay people sometimes that
Yeah.
are trying to read this that don't have a clue.
I will almost guarantee you this is not lay people reading this description, but
Yeah.
Well, I would hope
I am
that
changing all of the
everybody in
minus
that group-
signs to the word minus.
Minus, good job.
and the divided sign by divided?
Yeah.
Divided by?
And then when somebody
Divided
reads it
by.
out loud,
I think
it
we should
makes
leave
sense.
percentage in there because that's pretty
That's
universal.
fine, that's universal, I agree, but the,
But I think if we could do it line by line, one, you do this, you do this, you do this, you do this, you know, just return, return, return. It looks like,
Vaughn, you're suggesting to have each element on a separate line,
yeah,
right?
yeah, so that it's really, this is the formula. You can find it. It looks like a formula.
Yeah, 'cause we talk and see in pictures a lot, you know.
Yeah, that's just, I think once we arrive at what it's supposed to
Yeah.
look like, which I think we have, now you're just
We
talking
can
about format.
Formatting, yeah.
Yeah. Do you see his face?
So would
His
we
face.
like gross parcel square footage, comma, minus next line, square footage of all very poorly drained soils, comma, minus
I'd like parcel size.
gross parcel size?
No gross, just parcel size, I think.
Okay, so we go from parcel size to square footage. So we
Yeah.
should, size is one thing, square footage is a description of size.
It all
So I think
depends
we
on how
should,
you read it.
yeah,
We should
keep
use
it
the
the
common
same.
terms
Yeah,
for
the same.
area.
You
Yeah.
want to call it
So
what?
if we keep saying square footage, we should start with square footage.
Okay, so how about parcel size, comma, minus area of all poorly drained soils,
Very,
very poorly drained soils, comma, minus, new line. Blessed heart, guys, you're killing me. area of all slopes greater than or equal to 25%, comma, minus, hard return. 5% of the remaining parcel for road rights-of-way.
Should it be 5% of the remaining area for road rights?
Lord knows at this point.
Yeah,
How about remaining parcel area?
There you go.
I think that's clear, but I'm not.
Comma, divided, hard return. Yes. Okay.
It would be minimum lot area of the underlying zoning district.
Okay, so now we want it divided by minimum parcel size or minimum lot?
Minimum lot area of underlying, the under,
You're just changing the sentence around. That's okay.
the zoning ordinance under the lot size refers to minimum lot area.
Okay. Do we want the parentheses or no?
Nah,
They're extra.
Nah? Okay.
Nah.
I
They
think now
seem to
that
be
we have it
extra.
formatted in a row, it
Lord
probably
Lord
doesn't
knows,
need
it's
it.
multiple rows.
One last thing on that whole exercise we just did. I think we should standardize to use either parcel or lot, but not mix the two.
Right.
Discuss.
Does anybody else have a feeling?
I think parcel.
I like things to match.
the
Because
Well,
minimum lot
there
size
is not
is
parcel size of very poorly drained. And there's not parcel size of slope.
the zoning ordinance refers to, under lot size, to minimum lot area is how it's listed in each district.
So right now, it says D, permitted density, the following formula shall determine the maximum density permitted for a conservation subdivision, colon, hard return, centered. Parcel size, comma, minus, hard return. Area of all poorly drained soils, comma, minus, hard return. Area of all slopes greater than or equal to 25%, comma, minus, 5% of the remaining parcel area for the road rights-of-way superscript 1, comma, divided, hard return, minimum lot area of underlying zoning district.
I like it. They can use square footage if they want. They could use acres, when they come to us.
And then,
I would forget the one and just put a sentence underneath it with the planning board's authorization to modify. So just a line
okay,
underneath.
so get rid of the 1. Superscript goes away.
Similar to the way you did it here, but with our new wording.
You want it to say note, colon, or? Because otherwise it's just hanging out. Do you want that in parentheses underneath?
No, I was just going to have it hanging out.
Okay. So, comma, divided hard return, minimum lot area of underlying zoning district, 2 hard returns. The planning board is authorized to reduce the percentage of right-of-way.
I would put make that percentage deduction.
To reduce the percentage deduction for right-of-way?
That's not the right word.
Yeah, because you're deducting it from the total.
The percentage deduction?
The above percentage deduction for right-of-way? The planning board is authorized to reduce the percentage deduction for right-of-way when the percentage of proposed right-of-way is less than 5%, period.
So I thought it was easier when it sounded like the planning board reserves the authority to reduce the percentage of right-of-way if it is less than 5%.
But it's a deduction
reads
that you're
easier.
modifying,
Reduce.
however you want to do it.
So, hold on. So what I heard just now was the planning board is further authorized to reduce the percentage deduction for right-of-way when the percentage of proposed right-of-way is less than 5%.
I don't, the further authorized is unnecessary.
Well, but you just said that.
I didn't. The planning board reserves the authority to reduce the percentage.
Reserves the authority to reduce, okay?
How about
Or
the
the right of way
percentage to
if
be
it is-
deducted?
Yeah.
I didn't hear what you said.
He said
To
the
be
planning board
deducted.
reserves the right to reduce the percentage to be deducted, is what
Yeah.
Brad suggested.
And, I mean, I would grant the authority, not have the planning board reserve it.
So the planning board
Or the planning board is authorized to.
is granted the authority to reduce the percentage deduction for right-of-way when the percentage of proposed right-of-way is less than 5%.
Yeah, that'll do it. Until next time.
Yeah, till next time.
Yes, until next time. I love it when you guys say that. I did go, so the next paragraph down, concept plan, I did change the reference to 175, 151 because that number changed. I don't think anything else really changed from previous discussion. Oh, I did have one more question. There was a question in my head, because it went back and forth, kind of like what we just did. 175, 151, H2.
H2.
The 20
Is
distance.
that under yard?
A minimum, yes, under yard requirements, number 2. A minimum distance of 20 feet shall be maintained between buildings on separate lots. A minimum distance of 20 feet shall be maintained between buildings on the same lot. Is that correct?
Well,
It
it
seems
says what I
silly.
wanted to. I
It
was trying to
says
get-
what we discussed, but I think it should just be one thing.
Well, yeah, we had this discussion last
We
time
did.
about whether it should be
Yes.
one or two things.
We-
Right, a minimum distance of 20 feet shall be maintained between all buildings within the development also works.
Period.
But this removes the question about between, I'm not trying to dig it up again. I just want to have it reflected on what the board wants it to say.
Can it say all? Can
Between
it say
all
20 feet between
buildings.
all buildings?
Well, that was one of the suggestions, but there was some heated discussion last time about that.
Yeah, but every single one of them, because we just said in 2 sentences, every single one of them.
Yes.
I like it to be shorter. But,
Otherwise, it almost looks like we have a double sentence.
yeah,
You know,
like it was a typo.
redundancy could be taken out, but
So a minimum distance of 20 feet shall be maintained between all buildings.
Well,
Period.
I think a minimum distance of 20 feet shall be maintained between buildings on separate lots or buildings on the same lot.
So it's one sentence and still says both
and
things.
buildings on the same lot.
Can't just say all, okay.
So a minimum distance of 20 feet shall be maintained between buildings on separate lots.
And my vote is for and between buildings on the same lot, but
And between
I'm not gonna
buildings on the
mad
same
on
lot.
that.
Well, I don't think there's a right way or a wrong way, but this removes the question when you're dealing with multiple lots.
Yes. And it reduces it also to one sentence, which I think is clearer.
Yes, much clearer with 1 sentence.
So the only question is, let's say you have a house and a garage, and they're not attached. Should we have to have 20 feet between them?
Yes.
Yes, that's what this says.
I know it does. I'm just
We came
wondering
up
if
with
we
the
should
20
do
feet
that
when we were doing the ADU too, as
That
the
was a fire truck.
distance.
between them.
And you have to have a cornfield between the two.
Oh, yikes.
On I,
Yep.
an earlier draft had it by the planning board, and the planning seems to have been lost on I.
Where does it
Allowed
say?
by the planning board, and I think one of the earlier drafts had the board.
Not just the board,
Yes,
planning
the
board.
planning board.
So my I says discretionary density bonuses, period. Additional density may be granted, oh, but you want planning, I think, well, if it,
Because we may be creating new boards here in these communities. Who knows?
no, see, in black is what it says right now, so I probably did, I will admit, I probably did miss adding planning board there. I was looking in the red that says planning board everywhere, but I see what now the distinction is.
And I have a comment on number 2 under I,
Yep,
where we're doing inclusionary zoning. I would have the last sentence read, density bonuses on this, under this provision shall be calculated pursuant to section 175-32B of this ordinance. And that 175-32B is a section that grants the bonuses for affordable housing.
Yep.
And when you take in all of that, there are other provisions which could conflict with the conservation subdivision, but this gives you those bonuses.
so I2 now says affordable housing in accordance with Article 5 inclusionary zoning is proposed. Density bonuses under this provision shall be calculated pursuant to section 175-32B.
I guess I would end up saying that I would prefer not to have the number of it, because if we end up editing it and have to renumber, then you end up worrying about making it consistent in the
Well, the
future.
problem is you've got a lot of provisions in the inclusionary zoning, which some of which could conflict with the conservation subdivision.
Okay,
You,
it's fine.
You're absolutely right, and I
Yeah.
can probably point to 5 other sections of the ordinance that now currently misdirect. That's just making sure we follow it in the future.
It's fine.
Other than that, buffer area didn't change unless I mistransposed something, and I'm open to feedback on that. Nothing changed in conservation land, and nothing changed under non-conforming structures other than the numbering.
Under conservation land, under 6, I think we added pastures after agricultural cultivation.
We added what?
Pastures, didn't we?
They aren't necessarily cultivated.
Oh, and pastures?
Yeah, I thought we
Well,
added
Or pastures.
Agricultural pastures?
agricultural cultivation and pastures.
Okay, so A, forest management, B, agricultural cultivation, C, agricultural pastures.
Now, I was going to put agricultural cultivation and
And
pastures because they're all
Or it could be
agricultures.
and/or pastures.
Yeah,
And/or pastures. Okay,
I'm not an English major, but there's a few things that jumped out at me, and it has to do with the capitalization of things, as in K there, conserved land. Conserved land is capitalized in one place, down in 4, it's not capitalized. And I think there's,
so
should it be capitalized whenever we're talking about conserved land?
what I did was make all conserved land conservation land and capitalized, because that refers to this particular section of
But you
conservation land.
missed it in 4.
that,
Not
down
not
near the
anymore.
now that should not be capitalized because that's not referring to conservation land in the conservation subdivision. It's talking about conserved land elsewhere.
Okay, so nowhere in 4 do you want capitalized on conservation land.
I do in the second sentence. I mean, the second line.
Yeah, where it's presently capitalized.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I read it and I just see some places it's capitalized and others not. And, is a vegetated buffer supposed to be capitalized?
Yes. So under conservation land 4, the applicant shall submit proposal for the use of the remainder of the required conservation land. Is that capitalized?
Yes.
Yes. Because
The board shall then determine upon consideration of the character of the land, blah, 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 proximity of adjacent conservation land.
Adjacent conserved land.
Adjacent
Small.
conserved.
Yeah, because this is
Small
like
letters.
if you've got a conservation easement on a parcel next door
Okay,
or some
Got it.
other conservation restriction.
With small letters.
yes.
So another picky thing is sometimes we call it conservation lands and sometimes we call it conservation land. I think we should just stick to land.
Well,
Like
Yeah,
six.
on 6, it says conservation lands, that became
Yeah.
land.
and there's,
And should forest management be capitalized?
Oh, capital F, capital M, question
Yeah.
mark?
Yeah.
So right now I have forest management, both capitalized. Agricultural cultivation and/or pastures where A, C, and P are capitalized.
Yeah,
Trails
capitalized.
is capitalized, and snowmobile trails, S and T are capitalized,
Seems logical.
I guess.
I have one more thing, and that is on their discretionary bonuses,
Where are we looking?
I-1. And it should be where increases in conservation land, and the S got changed, the D, S got changed to a D, and it needs to be changed back to increases.
Density increases may be permitted where increases in conservation land are beyond 50%. Okay.
I wonder if we can get a draft. I know when we present it, we have to do all the strikeouts. That's just clean so that we can read it clear through without all the red stuff.
So what I did was I took what you have in front of you when I saved it as Conservation Subdivision 61824, red line 7224. I'm going to send it to each of you with red line, and then I'm going to accept all the changes and send it to you. So you can
We'll
see
have both versions.
Just
both versions side by side.
Great.
Yep.
It's getting wicked
All right,
confusing.
are we done?
With this, yes.
All right.
I can't see straight anymore, so yeah,
Yeah.
we're good.
It's done.
So that's the end of the conservation subdivision, and now we move on to multifamily housing discussion.
So what I did, and this is ironically saved under Voter's Guide zoning amendments from an earlier version. What you have in front of you, I started out because the board had talked earlier this year about leaving the C2 removal in. So that memo starts out with C2 coming out. Then I attempted to modify what the question may look like to reflect your changes. So I would suggest you not focus on the question right now, because we can play with that until a public hearing. But as you go through it, under village residential, what I heard the board say was add multifamily dwellings. So one of the questions, and this is going to go through every one of these that I roll through, would you prefer I refer to multifamily dwellings in accordance with 143 through 145, or in the case of village residential, refer to 144? Here's the nuance. (175) 144 currently refers to requirements for VR, R, GR, and all commercial districts except CBD and WF districts. So what I heard the board say at the last meeting was point everyone to the multifamily section and let the multifamily section control. So I drafted it the way I did in accordance with 175, 143 through 175, 145.
Yes.
I think the way you have it here is better for
Okay.
consistency.
So then
Yeah.
for residential district, added B, multifamily dwellings, general residential, multifamily dwellings, they're all the same, that's why I'm not going through them. Bay Street Limited District. There was a discussion at the last meeting about removing residential apartments not permitted on the first floor. So I put multifamily dwellings up under C and renumbered accordingly going throughout.
I can't remember why I've got this written here, but it says.
I can't, what?
I can't remember why I wrote this now. It's been 2 days. I have not C with an arrow pointed at multifamily dwelling under Bay Street Limited Business District. I was cross-referencing to the RSAs, and it evidently didn't match up. Just,
I don't know what RSA you're pointing to.
Right.
well, the one that we're looking at here, this isn't an RSA, the multifamily dwelling stuff. We're down under the Bay Street Limited District. So I went to 175, 106, it's not an RSA, 105, 106, pulled open my notebook, went down through there, and for some reason, I wrote not C, where you stuck C. So in my mind, it says something about how they're numbered. Can you just make a note?
I think the change that was made here eliminates the non-residential.
There was something that I actually went to the effort to go to the basket, to get out my book, to open the book. There was something
Well,
there.
175, 106 currently says A, single detached dwelling, B, duplex dwelling, C, accessory home occupations. So everything just moved down one. C became multifamily, so that was residential, 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 and then changed. So,
So maybe it's okay then. Maybe it's okay.
well, it might not, accessory home occupations, accessory structures, everything in here remains the same. So what you're seeing on the memo in front of you, D was C, E was D, F was
I think it
E,
moved around.
and it goes all the way through. But the point, I'm looking for context, not formatting, because the formatting will sort itself out. I'm just looking for the board to confirm that, yes, the idea in Bay Street Limited was to get rid of residential apartments, not permitted on the first floor, and to insert multifamily dwellings in accordance with 143 through 145. Pine Hill Road was a little different. I tried to make that very clear. Multifamily dwellings is currently limited by A, and the board discussion was to move it out of A and make it its own to insert multifamily dwellings. I did go ahead and change South Wolfeboro Limited Business District because it currently says multifamily housing with one only means site plan review, which obviously it does. I changed it simply to read the same way as everything else for consistency across all the other districts, especially consistency with 143 through 145. Center Street. This is something that had been hanging out. It was part of the no on 2 through 10. This is about adding the accessory dwelling unit. It's allowed anyway. This is just putting it back in. C1, again, calling out multifamily dwellings in accordance with. Wolfeboro Falls. I just changed H to swap out residential apartments not permitted on the first floor with multifamily dwellings in accordance with 175, 143 through 145. Same thing could be done in Bay Street. It's a board preference, but the same thing is happening. And then changing the definition of dwelling, multi-unit to dwelling, multifamily, because that then is consistent with all the zones and with the section itself that deals with multifamily.
So just relative to that dwelling multifamily, designed or adapted with, 3 or more dwelling units, what happens to 2?
Dwelling is a 2 families.
It's allowed to be 2 everywhere.
No, not everywhere, because we have, and I brought this up previously and the board decided not to change it. We have dwelling, duplex, which talks about 2 dwelling units in one structure that are of similar proportions, as opposed to calling it simply a 2-family dwelling. It has to meet that definition, and there was negative feedback from members of the zoning board and the public about changing that definition that hasn't hurt anyone.
Could we just say with 2 or more dwelling units?
Nope.
No?
Currently, you have dwelling unit, which is one or more rooms arranged, designed, or used for residential purposes for one household and containing independent sanitary and cooking facilities. The presence of cooking and sanitary facilities conclusively establishes the intent to use for residential purposes. Dwelling unit is further defined as follows. Dwelling multi-unit, which I'm proposing you go to dwelling multifamily, is a building and the accessories thereto principally used, designed, or adapted with 3 or more dwelling units, each of which have separate living quarters. Dwelling, duplex, a building and the accessories thereto principally used, designed, or adapted with 2 dwelling units of similar proportions, the living quarters for each of which are completely separate. A single-family dwelling with an accessory dwelling unit is not a duplex dwelling unit. And then dwelling, single family, which
We're
again,
missing-
what's that?
I don't think we have these in here.
No, I gave you
Okay.
the one
Okay.
that was proposing to change.
Okay.
And dwelling, single family, which is a building and accessories thereto, principally used, designed, or adapted as a single dwelling unit. The addition of an ADU to a single family dwelling unit does not change the status of a single dwelling unit to a duplex dwelling. So a couple of months ago, I asked the planning board, what was the purpose of the planning board in saying that a single family in an ADU is not a duplex, which under IRC it is, because it's either 1 or 2 family dwelling. And there was comment that IRC doesn't control what the town does, and that an ADU is different from what a duplex is, unless you look at it from a building perspective. But the point here is that you need 3 or more to be multifamily. And what I brought up at the last meeting is we don't define multifamily other than our multifamily section, where we intimate the same thing as multi-unit. So what's in front of you is simply to change multi-unit to multifamily, which is 3 or more.
So can you have 2 families in one dwelling unit which are not of the same size and not an ADU? Can you have a 2-family, not multifamily?
Not by the current definition, no.
So where does that fit into here?
Doesn't.
So it seems weird.
It's like the commercial district, it says you can have a single and you can have a multi.
Which
you
is
can't
a
have
3 or more, you can't have 2 unless they're a duplex, which to me would
No, you
imply
can't.
they have to be the same size.
Right.
No, they have to be of similar proportion.
Right. They
And-
kind of look
and-
like each other.
And no one knows, no one has been able to say what that is.
If you
I
Google it,
believe the
cream
comment
size?
was,
Is it
you know it
petite?
when you see it.
yeah,
So that
it's
makes
usually
everything
something that
easy.
looks like the mirror of itself.
Proportion
So
to
in
each
the
other, yeah.
C1 district, for example, you're allowed a single detached dwelling per lot, 1 accessory dwelling unit, 1 duplex per lot, and then later on, multifamily.
Shouldn't we just say 2-family?
I will let you carry that water. Last time I brought it,
I think it
was
should be
not
1 or
received well.
multi. I think we're going to have to hold out for that later. It's either 1 or more than 1
Well,
for a different day.
I think the intent of the board was to say that an ADU is not inherently a duplex, but the idea is that a duplex is different from an ADU. An ADU has to be owner occupied, the owner has to live in one, but you can't dictate which one.
It has to be smaller by a certain percentage.
30%.
Yeah. What if it's
So the
40%?
question, that was my question, and it went nowhere with the board and the public at the time. I will let somebody else bring that up in the future. And then the last part of that discussion dealt with the Center Street Route 28 mixed-use business district. There was discussion at the last meeting about modifying that. So what I put at the end of this memo is to add to 175-144 and all commercial districts except Center Street Route 28 mixed-use business district, CBD, and Wolfeboro Falls.
I have notes on that, because we just pulled out just those ones that's not, but not all of the districts are listed here.
They are.
So somebody's going to say, well, what about that one that it's not included in, but it's not listed at all?
Which one?
Can't even tell you what one it is now when I was looking, because I went and I counted, and I went, you know what I mean? So I think we should say it's included in these districts and not included in these districts, and this plus this equals all of them, so that there is no question that we got them all. We
Well,
didn't
if
leave
it's
one out.
not, I'll tell you how it's been used. If it's not labeled as a residential district, it's a commercial district. And the only two that are called out specifically are the Central Business District and the Wolfeboro Falls. So the South Wolfeboro Falls Limited Business District is a commercial district that is not a Wolfeboro Falls zone. So that falls under 144. The Center Street Route 28 is a commercial district that's not CBD or Wolfeboro Falls. So it would
Right.
fall under 144 until the discussion at the last meeting where it was suggested that multifamily should not be allowed there.
I think it's confusing.
You what?
I'm still confused. I would just like it to say it's okay in all of those, and it's not okay in any of those. It would just be more clear.
It could be. So if it were to say in 144, requirements for all residential districts, that would now include the residential agriculture, which is not currently listed.
Or just list each one, not all, just list each district so that they're all included. Because it is, as it is now, we're leaving out some, and that raises the question, well, did you miss one? Is there a typo? You know what I mean?
It hasn't raised its head yet. The only question that's been
This is
raised
me.
right now is because Center Street Route 28 district doesn't list multifamily, is it authorized under 144? And the current interpretation is yes, but to clarify that, we're now removing it with, you are now removing it with the proposed change.
Yeah, because I have another note here. It says, what about Bay Street? Didn't we just put multifamily over here on Bay Street?
What about what?
Bay Street.
It's
Bay Street is a commercial district not under CBD or Wolfeboro Falls,
all
yes.
commercial districts.
To your point, there's nothing that says commercial districts are as follows, residential
Right.
districts are as follows.
Right.
But when you go through the uses permitted in Bay Street Limited, it's very clear that commercial is allowed, therefore it's not a residential district.
Right, but what I'm saying is, how we're trying to make this easier. I shouldn't have had to go from here, get the freaking book out, go back and look and look and look. You know what I mean?
So what I'm hearing you suggest is that 175, 144 should read requirements for the VRR, GR, BSLBD, S Wolfeboro Limited Business District.
And then don't say except, don't say that. Just put
No, I
put
understand.
all of them that it's
It won't
allowed,
work
and
if you
then
do
make
that.
one more line that says not allowed in, and then
But they
all the
are
rest of
allowed.
them. so
But they
they're all
are in
listed.
145.
Yeah.
I think it should be left the way it is. I mean, list the residential districts where they're allowed, and then list all commercial districts. And if you start getting into the whole names of these districts, nobody's going to have any idea what you're talking about.
No, there are still zoning districts that refer to zones that no longer exist.
Yeah,
Yep.
It's just because they were, to Peter's point 20 minutes ago, if we don't list this, is that going to get missed later? Yeah, it will, because it has. I understand your point. It hasn't raised itself to concern yet.
But I think what we're doing now is correcting part of the problem by listing multifamily as permitted uses in those districts where the ordinance has always been interpreted as permitting them, but don't list them as permitted uses.
Correct.
I think the real issue here is how we were going to put this together so that, when you read, starting with village residential down, it makes great sense. But when you read, are you in favor of, I think we're going to need how we're going to put this together so that we can explain it and people have some prospect of understanding what we're saying.
Yeah, Roger, I think that comes back to what we discussed previously about having sort of a lay interpretive statement at the beginning of it.
Yeah,
But I don't think you can, I think the question is, do we want to divide some of these up? And that may not make sense given that we're trying to make this uniform.
you're right.
But
because
we're
they're all
also
units.
making many of these changes are, I think, would be viewed as not making a change to the ordinance, but some of them are, like Wolfeboro Falls and Bay Street, we are making a change.
What are you talking about, Roger? about the other things that aren't the multifamily things that are
Yes,
listed?
it's like
no,
the prohibition of residential on the first floor, that's another change.
Yeah, that's in my mind, yeah, that is a separate.
So it's potentially arguable that in the VR, the R, and the residential districts, it's simply a version of a Scrivener's error that multifamily is not listed as a permitted use, because it says it over here, but it doesn't say it over here. But then there are discrete changes where residential apartments, comma, not permitted on the first floor,
That's a change.
have to change. So, you know, when you look at the first page of that version of a memo in front of you, that is a big question with a lot to swallow.
An awful lot. I've
So,
even got
and it could be done
questions.
simply with, you know, are you in favor of the adoption of amendment number blank as proposed by the planning board, which moves things clearly permitted under 175, 143 through 145 into the base zoning districts and further amends other sections. It's all in how you word this. Believe it or not, this is about 2 hours of penmanship trying to figure out if that accounts for each of the nuances, and I think it does. I can think of one resident that's going to say, that doesn't say what you're doing.
Oh, yeah, yeah. And I even have a question, because I got 2 pink marks in it here.
But
I
in
can't remember
order-
what the questions were.
Yeah,
you know?
in order to answer that question, you literally have to sit down and have this piece next to this piece.
Yeah.
Oh, I see that. So that's what the next 4 pages are attempting to show.
Right, but people aren't going to be able to have the last 4 pages in the ballot box with them.
Well, one of the things I'm working on with the town manager is to do what used to be done here so that that is on the ballot.
Yeah.
And it makes for a heck of a long ballot when you put, you know, say you have 4 zoning questions, this is one of them, but it's 5 pages long. That makes for a long ballot that ends up ultimately at the same question at the end. Yes, no?
Yeah, but at least people can read it then. They might have a chance of understanding it rather than just automatically saying no because
Yeah.
we don't get it.
I'm not sure that was on the ballot, but it was certainly in the town report and posted on the warrant.
Correct. So my earlier New Hampshire employer, people religiously came into the ballot with their town report, and they had little notes on the side. I'm okay with this one, so I understand this.
Yeah,
Okay, vote.
that's what we do with our meeting notes. We take them in with us, but
Oh, and-
only like 20 people show up at that thing. You know, that's the problem.
Correct.
So
But we're also
I-
doing this in July instead of
Yeah.
November, so we have plenty of time to invite people in.
I wonder if we shouldn't separate this into 2 ballot items, one having to do with the residential apartments on the first floor, and the other one, the multifamily thing.
That would
Because
certainly
it's
simplify it from
two
a perception.
separate,
Yeah.
yeah, items.
Yeah, because it's 2 thoughts. That's
Yeah.
2 separate thoughts.
So just because you're in favor of multifamily dwelling units doesn't mean you're in favor of the non-permitting residential units on the ground floor.
My only concern there is if you have, this says pick the Bay Street Limited, forget the memo. C says multifamily is allowed under this. D says residential apartments not permitted on the first floor. If one fails, the intent of the planning board is not furthered.
No, 1/2 of it is furthered. Multifamily dwelling units are further. It's just a matter of what floor it can be on.
It's better than nothing. But-
Right, but that's not what the board is trying to put
No,
forward.
no, but
No.
at least we're sorting out what the town people want
Okay.
individually.
With the-
We're
with
going to have a
the-
hearing
with the-
anyway, so maybe.
Well, I think that
they'll
gets down to a
understand it.
political discussion on the strategy in which you approach the
Right.
ordinances.
I think there are at least 4 projects that have attempted to make it through the permitting paradigm that have failed because of that lack of clarity.
Yeah.
So, anyway, if this is what you think it is, that's what I have for now. I'm happy, open for comment moving forward. I can break things out into 2 or 3 questions, et cetera.
I still think that the multifamily ought to be 2 or more dwelling units and get rid of the whole weird question.
But multifamily is not 2 or more units
Yeah, right, it
in
is
building
not.
code.
It's just not.
Building code is 1 and,
Right, right.
IRC is 1 and 2,
I
and
know
then
that,
IBC.
actually, yeah.
Well,
But the,
That's the only reason the ordinance is doing it.
yeah.
And I think that's going to further confuse things for the public if you try to
Right.
make that additional change. And it doesn't really make a substantial difference in how we operate or how people will develop their properties.
That's all I got.
So have we concluded discussion on the multifamily for the moment? No more comments? All right.
today.
I think let's move on to public comment. And I don't see anybody, so we'll move on from public comment to approving the minutes of June 18th, which you have in front of you or were included in your packet.
Yeah, I've read them.
Does anybody have any comments or corrections to the minutes?
They look lovely. Thank you, Leanne.
Yeah, I have one comment. This has been corrected or changed on the minutes posted on the website, but under the May 21 minutes, on page 9, lifetime agreement, homes, vote to change the vote was changed from 507 to 502, and it should be 520. There were 2 votes against and no abstentions.
So that's not these meeting notes, that's some
It's an
earlier.
observation of previous minutes. The change wasn't made appropriately.
It's been corrected on the
Well, it's
town.
correct in the actual minutes, but it's not shown correctly in the minutes of the discussion of the minutes in these minutes. How's
No,
that
but
for a
it should be
mouthful?
uniform, particularly with this applicant.
So page 9 needs to be changed to reflect the change to the approved minutes, yes.
Page 5 and what I see here.
Yeah, page 5 needs to be changed.
Oh, I heard him say 5 or 9, sorry, page 5.
Yeah, it's page 9 of the May 21 minutes.
Yeah, page 9 of the May 21 minutes, but page 5 of the June 18th minutes.
Yeah,
And just a follow-up question, did the site plan review packet now contain the architectural standards?
Yes.
Thank you.
Well, the site plan packet has now been updated to reflect the current site plan regulations, which includes the architectural guidelines, yes.
Not the guidelines, the standards.
Well,
Yeah.
yes, the guidelines became the standards which are part of the site plan regulations. What the failure was is that the multiple copies of the site plan application that was out there included an earlier version of the site plan regulations. So what I'm trying to say is they now include the current site plan regulations, which include the architectural requirements.
Standards, and it's the whole set of the standards?
It's, everything under, was it 173 is
Okay.
one solid packet, yes.
All right, thank you.
All right, I'd like to make a motion to approve the June 18th minutes with the corrections as noted.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None? And then lastly, before we adjourn, I'd like to note that the agent for the applicant earlier this evening complimented his interaction with our town planner, so that was nice to hear.
particularly since
He
the town
complimented his
planner told me
interaction with the
couldn't
town
do it.
planner.
He didn't like the answer, but he appreciated the
That's
dialogue.
right. And I don't care if he likes the answer, as long as he's happy with the representation.
Yeah.
I'll make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Second.
All in favor? Thank you.
Here, here.